I want you to think about the worst decision you've ever made in your life. Not the kind of decision where you picked the wrong job or took the wrong exit on the highway. I mean the kind of decision that gets made in front of 2,000 alien dignitaries, broadcast across 11 star systems, with your whole species' reputation riding on whatever comes out of your mouth in the next 4 seconds. That was my Tuesday. Well, Tuesday by Earth calendar. Out here in the Galatian Conclave's diplomatic sector, time is measured in orbital cycles and tide phases of whatever gas giant the station's currently orbiting. But my brain still runs on Earth time. My gut still knows what Tuesday feels like. And that Tuesday, standing in the grand choosing hall of the Conclave's unification ceremony, with my hands sweating through formal dress gloves made from some silken fiber harvested off a moon I'd never heard of, my gut was screaming at me. It was screaming, "Don't pick the safe one. I should back up. Set up." My name is Corporal Marcus Reyes, age 29, born in Tucson, Arizona, raised on bad local TV, canned beans, and a grandmother who used to say that the universe was too big for small thinking. She was right, she just didn't know how right. I joined Earth's Joint Diplomatic Corps 4 years ago, which sounds a lot more impressive than it is. The EJDC is not a glamorous outfit. We're not the military, that's a different department. We're not the science division, different department again. The EJDC is the outfit that gets deployed when someone needs to sit in a room with a species that communicates through color shifts in their exoskeleton and try to negotiate trade routes without accidentally insulting their concept of spiritual ancestry. We're the awkward middle children of humanity's space program. I got assigned to the Galatian Conclave posting 18 months prior. The Conclave is essentially the galaxy's United Nations, except with actual enforcement power, a fleet of warships that could glass a continent in an afternoon, and bureaucratic processes so ancient that some of the legal codes predate Earth's dinosaurs. Every major spacefaring species sends representatives. Humanity joined about 12 years ago. We are, by every measurable metric, the youngest and least impressive members of that body. The Conclave tolerates us the way a crowded elevator tolerates the person who got in last. They make room. They don't particularly like it. My job, my actual day-to-day job, was to be the aide to Senior Ambassador Delane. Ambassador Delane was a 63-year-old woman from Montreal who'd spent her career negotiating things, and she was very good at it, and she had about as much patience for my particular brand of curiosity as a surgeon has patience for a medical student who keeps asking, "But why does that vein do that?" But she respected competence, and somewhere in those 18 months, she decided I was competent. Which is why, when the unification ceremony invitation came through, she handed it to me. Let me explain the unification ceremony, because it matters. Every 50 years, 50 galactic standard years, which works out to roughly 62 Earth years, the Conclave holds a ceremony where allied species are encouraged to formalize diplomatic bonds through what they call union rights. On the surface, it's a cultural exchange. Species pair representatives together, usually one from each allied delegation, and the paired individuals spend the following year doing joint service assignments, cultural exchanges, collaborative projects. In practice, it's an arranged marriage program. Not always literally. The pairings are legally flexible. Some species don't reproduce with each other, obviously, and the biology makes certain things impossible across wildly different anatomical structures. But the intent is partnership, real partnership. Living together, working together, building something together that represents the alliance between your species. Humans had never been invited before. We'd only been in the Conclave for 12 years, and you don't get invited to the unification ceremony until you've got a formal ally. Humanity's first formal ally, the Thessari, a tall, three-jointed species from a low-gravity world who communicate in flowing gestures, had nominated us. Ambassador Delane could not attend. She had a diplomatic emergency on Station 7, involving a misunderstanding about tariff language that had somehow escalated into what she described as a situation where people are using the word aggression with concerning frequency. So she sent me. "You're the representative," she said. "The Thessari sponsor us. They've arranged for a candidate pool of females from allied species. Don't make that face, Raise. It's how the ceremony works, and you will attend. You will conduct yourself with dignity, and you will make a selection that reflects well on humanity." "How do I know which one to pick?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment over the rim of her reading glasses. She still wore reading glasses. She said they grounded her. "Pick someone interesting," she said. "We don't need another political photo opportunity. We need an actual connection. Pick someone who makes you nervous." That was her advice. Pick someone who makes you nervous. She had no idea how literally I would take it. The choosing hall is one of the most staggering rooms I've ever stood in. And I say that as someone who's been inside the great assembly chamber of the conclave itself, which is essentially a sphere the size of a sports stadium with every wall covered in the insignia of the member species. The choosing hall is different. It's intimate in the way that a thunderstorm is intimate. You feel it close to your skin, pressing against you, demanding your attention. The room is circular. The ceiling is open to space. Not open, there's a field there, a particle shield that keeps the atmosphere in, but it's transparent. And above us was the slow sprawl of a nebula called the Vethara Drift, which is a cloud of ionized gas that glows in colors human eyes weren't really designed to process. Purple that goes deeper than purple. Gold that's almost white. Green that sits at the edge of visible light and makes you feel slightly motion sick if you stare at it too long. The floor was polished. Some kind of composite stone, dark gray with veins of something luminescent running through it, so the floor itself seemed to breathe faintly. There were 2,000 seats arranged in concentric rings around a central floor space. Dignitaries from a dozen species. I could pick out the Thessari by their height and the fluid way they moved. The Keth were there, reptilian, 7 feet tall, with overlapping scale patterns that changed color slightly depending on their emotional state. The Vulgari, who look remarkably like humanity's concept of a classic gray alien except about twice the size, and with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern. The Marinid, aquatic by evolution, but long adapted to atmospheric environments, with gill slits along their necks that fluttered when they breathed, and a faint bioluminescent shimmer in their skin. And there were others I didn't recognize, species I'd read about in briefing files but never seen. Representatives from systems so far out that the light from their home stars hadn't reached Earth when humanity was still figuring out agriculture. I stood at the entrance to the central floor in my formal dress uniform, deep navy, silver piping, the small EJDC emblem on my collar, and I felt, genuinely, like a child who'd wandered into the wrong room. A Thessari aide came to greet me. Her name translation was Flowing Water Over Smooth Stone, which I'd been told to shorten to Floa in casual address. She was about 8 feet tall, slender, with a head that elongated toward the back and eyes that were large and golden and completely without visible pupils. "Corporal Rays," she said. Her translator implant was excellent. Her voice came out in clear English with just the faintest harmonic underneath it, a resonance that wasn't quite human. "We are glad you were able to attend." "Glad to be here," I said. "It was a complete lie. I was terrified, but it's what you say." "You understand the ceremony. Candidate pool, I make a selection. We formalize the pairing." She tilted her head slightly. "You understand it socially." I hesitated. "I think so." "The candidates have also been briefed on the human delegation. They have the right to decline. The selection must be mutual." "Right, of course." "And you understand the significance of the first human pairing." I understood it. The way a person understands that they're standing on the edge of something, not because they've measured the distance to the bottom, but because their body is telling them to be careful. Yes, I said. Floa studied me for a moment in that thesauri way that's hard to describe, not unkind, but deeply assessing, like they're reading something in you that you yourself can't access. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She put one long-fingered hand briefly on my forearm, a gesture I'd been briefed on, a thesauri expression of genuine goodwill, like a quick, confident nod from a friend. I hope you choose bravely, she said. Then she led me to my position. The candidates were introduced in sequence. I'm going to be honest about something. I remember the order, but my brain was processing information at the speed of someone who's been awake too long in a high-stakes situation. I was catching details and losing others in real time. First candidate, Thesauri. Her name translated to something like Morning Cascade. She was stunning by any standard, tall, graceful, with that peculiar Thesauri beauty that always looks slightly like motion captured mid-gesture. She had done joint diplomatic work before. Her file showed 3 successful cross-species collaboration projects. She smiled at me, a real smile, adapted for human recognition, and I liked her immediately. She was safe. She was exactly what Ambassador Delane might have expected me to choose. Second candidate, Vulgari. Name, Zerath 7. The Vulgari naming system is numerical and hierarchical. She was senior, clearly. Her bearing said it before her file did. Diamond pattern eyes that studied me with calm, unreadable intelligence. The Vulgari are known for their analytical minds and their long-term strategic thinking. She would be an extraordinary partner for diplomatic work. She was also safe. Deliberately, carefully, strategically safe. Third candidate, Marinid. Name, Izilith. She had bioluminescence along her collarbone that pulsed faintly as she stood in the light of the ceremony space. Young, by Marinid standards, her file said she was an environmental systems specialist. She had the most human-accessible emotional expressiveness of the 3 so far. She actually looked nervous standing there, which I found strangely comforting. Still safe. The Marinid had been pushing hard for closer human relations for 3 years. Choosing Izilith would be popular with the diplomatic corps. Expected. Then the 4th candidate walked in. And the room changed. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean the room, the actual atmosphere of that space, shifted. The conversations in the surrounding seats dropped by a noticeable register. The Keth representative to my left made a sound that my translator rendered as a low, involuntary note of attention. 2 of the Vulgari dignitaries exchanged a glance. She was Dravhari. I need to tell you about the Dravhari, because if you haven't encountered them in the briefings, and most people in the EJDC haven't, because the Dravhari don't typically engage with diplomacy at this level, then you don't have context for what walked into that room. The Dravhari are a warrior species. Not in the casual, this culture values martial traditions way that some species are. In the way that millions of years of evolution on a world that was, by every geological measure, trying to kill everything that lived on it, produced a species that is, at a fundamental, physiological, psychological level, built for conflict. Their homeworld is called Dravgith, a high-gravity planet with an atmosphere that's technically breathable by humanoid standards, but runs about 30% denser than Earth's. The fauna on Dravgith is, and I'm using the technical classification here, apex class aggressive across the board. The smallest predator species documented on the planet's surface masses about 1/2 ton. The largest is the Korath, which is described in xenobiology files as functionally analogous to a biological tank with problem-solving capability. The Dravhari evolved in that environment. They are, on average, about 6 feet 2 to 6 feet 8 in height, with a physical density that makes them feel larger than their measurements. Their musculature is differently structured than human musculature. It's layered in a way that's visible even through clothing, like something that was engineered for power rather than developed by chance. Their skin ranges across a color spectrum from deep copper to near black, with natural pigmentation that shifts slightly under emotional state, not as dramatic as Keth scale color, but there if you know what to look for. Their eyes are a feature I haven't found a human parallel for. The iris is larger than a human iris, taking up about 80% of the visible eye, and the color is typically some shade of gold, amber, or deep orange, with a quality in the light that always looks like something is thinking very quickly behind them. They have a crest. Not like a bird crest, not feathers or anything like that. It's a structural ridge that runs from the hairline back along the skull, subtle in the females, more pronounced in the males. In combat or high emotion states, it rises slightly. I'd read about this. I was not prepared for seeing it. The Dravhari candidate's name, in translated form, was Vorithna Kale. She walked in like she owned the floor. Not arrogantly, not performatively. The way a person walks into a room when they are not afraid of any room. She was in formal Dravhari attire, which I later learned was a concession, because Dravhari formal wear is still built around practicality, still has the weight distribution and structure of something that wouldn't impede movement if you suddenly needed to move fast. Dark material, deep red detailing, minimal ornamentation except for a single piece of metal, some kind of alloy I didn't recognize worn at the base of her throat, which I later learned was a warrior's citation. It meant something important. I didn't know what yet. She scanned the room as she walked, not nervously, tactically, the way you check a space when you're trained to check spaces. Her eyes found me. I want to be clear about what that felt like. It felt like being located. Not seen, located. Like something had just taken your exact coordinates and was deciding what to do with the information. I did not look away. I don't know why. Some part of me that maybe wasn't entirely rational decided that looking away would be the wrong thing to do, so I held her gaze. She held mine. For about 4 seconds by my count. Then she looked away, to the dignitary seats, scanning the rest of the room with that same calm, comprehensive assessment. And I stood there feeling like I'd just passed some kind of test I hadn't studied for. Build tension. Floa appeared at my elbow during the intermission between candidate introductions and the selection process. You should know, she said quietly, that the Dravhari candidate was not originally on the list. I looked at her. What do you mean? She requested inclusion. 2 days ago it was unconventional. She asked to be included in a human pairing. Floa's long fingers moved in a gesture I'd come to recognize as thesari for precisely. The conclave nearly denied the request. The Dravhari do not typically participate in unification ceremonies. They are member species, but they engage with the diplomatic structure on their own terms, at their own pace. For one of their warrior caste to request inclusion in a human pairing. Why did she request it? Floa tilted her head. She said, and here she paused in a way that told me she was still processing the statement herself, that she had read the human records, all of them. Every document submitted to the conclave about human history, human warfare, human culture, and she wanted to meet one of us in person. I thought about that. That's not an answer to why she wanted to be paired with one of us. No, Floa agreed. It is not. She drifted away, and I stood there with that incomplete sentence sitting in my head like a stone in still water. The selection process, mechanically, worked like this. The human representative, me, would make a verbal declaration. The chosen candidate could accept or decline. If declined, the representative could either make a second choice or decline to pair entirely, which was a valid option. The whole thing was supposed to be dignified and ceremonial, and I was told the speeches usually lasted about 10 minutes. I had a speech prepared. Ambassador Delane's office had drafted it for me. It was a good speech. It hit the right diplomatic notes. It expressed humanity's gratitude for the invitation. It was warm without being sycophantic, and it gracefully led toward a selection of the Thessari candidate, Morning Cascade, which was the politically obvious choice, and the one that would make everyone in the room nod approvingly. I had that speech in my coat pocket. I didn't use it. Here's what happened, and I'm going to tell it exactly as it went because I've replayed it so many times in my head that I know every beat of it the way you know the words to a song you heard so often as a kid it became part of your bones. The ceremony reached the selection moment. I was standing in the center of that floor, the Vethara drift nebula breathing its impossible colors above me, 2,000 alien dignitaries watching in complete silence. The 4 candidates were arranged in a formal arc about 20 feet away. I reached into my pocket for the speech, and Vorth Nakale shifted her weight. It was a tiny movement, the smallest possible adjustment of stance, but it was, and I couldn't have explained this to anyone in that room, couldn't have explained it scientifically or logically. It was the movement of someone who had decided to endure the next 10 minutes. Someone who was setting themselves for something they expected to be exactly what they expected. She thought I was going to pick the safe one. She thought she'd come to this room, read all those records about humanity, decided to try something unconventional, and was about to watch a human diplomat pick the politically comfortable option while she went back to whatever she'd come from. I put the speech back in my pocket. There was a small eternity of silence while I organized my thoughts. I could feel the attention of the room like pressure against my skin. I started talking. I was given a speech, I said. It's a good speech. Someone worked hard on it. But I'm going to be honest with you all because I think honesty might be the most interesting thing a human can offer in this room right now. My voice carried clearly in that space. The translators did their work. I watched the subtle adjustments as 2,000 minds parsed the words into their respective languages and frameworks. I've been here 18 months, I continued. I have read every briefing file, every diplomatic record, every interspecies protocol document that I've been given access to. I have done my best to understand this community, this conclave, the way it works and the values it carries, and I want to tell you what I've noticed. I was improvising. My heart rate was somewhere in the range that a doctor would classify as concerning. I've noticed that humans make everyone nervous. A ripple through the crowd, not hostile, more like recognition. We joined this community 12 years ago, and we've spent most of that time trying to not make people nervous. We're the youngest species here. We know that. We know our technology is behind the curve. We know our history is complicated and sometimes ugly. We know that by every diplomatic metric, we're the junior partners and we should be careful and measured, and we should select the option that makes the most people comfortable. I paused. I don't think that's what's going to make us worth anything to this community. The silence was different now, sharper. There's a candidate in this room who I was told requested inclusion 2 days before this ceremony, who read every document about humans that exists in conclave archives, who came here not because it was expected, but because she was curious, who is standing right now. And I looked directly at Vorth Nakale, like someone who has already decided to be disappointed, and who I would like very much to prove wrong. Something happened in Vorth's eyes. It wasn't surprise exactly. I don't think Vorth Nakale was a person who surprised easily. It was more like recalculation, like a variable had changed in an equation she'd been running. I'm choosing Vorth Nakale, I said, of the Dravhari delegation, if she'll have me. The room, and I am not exaggerating this, did not breathe for about 3 seconds. 3 full seconds of 2,000 beings holding something back. Then the noise started. The noise was not applause. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't hostile either. It was something more complicated. The sound of a very large number of people reacting simultaneously to something they hadn't expected, which in a multilingual, Multi-species space comes out as a kind of controlled chaos of different tones and textures, translators working overtime, the specific acoustic signature of collective astonishment. I kept my eyes on Vorith. She hadn't moved. She was still in that stance, but it had changed. It was no longer the stance of someone setting themselves to endure. It was, I struggled to read it at first, because I was reading Dravhari body language by instinct rather than training, the stance of someone deciding. The Dravhari, I would later learn, make decisions fast. Their culture values decisiveness as a virtue so fundamental that extended hesitation in a clear information situation is considered a kind of moral failing. If you know what you know, and you know what you value, then the decision follows. Hesitation means you don't know yourself. Vorith walked forward. She stopped about 4 feet away from me. In human terms, that's uncomfortably close for a formal ceremony. In Dravhari terms, I would learn, it's the appropriate distance for direct and honest exchange. She was looking at me with those amber eyes that held the light in that particular way, and up close the crest along her skull was subtly visible. And she was, I should say this plainly, one of the most physically imposing people I had ever stood next to. And I grew up in a city, and I've been around large humans, and none of them prepared me for this specific quality of presence. You noticed that I'd already decided to be disappointed, she said. Her English was, and this caught me off guard, nearly accent-free. Better than some humans I'd known, actually. The translator was doing minimal work. Was I wrong? I asked. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, no. Another moment. You read the records, I said. Every document, every war, every peace treaty. Every failure and every recovery. Her voice was level, but there was something underneath it I couldn't quite name. Humans fail in spectacular ways, and then they get up. Yeah, I said, we're kind of stubborn that way. I wanted to see if it was real, she said, or if the records made it look better than it was. And now, she looked at me for a long moment. The Vithara drift moved in colors above us. Ask me again at the end of a year, she said. Then she raised her right hand, palm forward, fingers spread, and I would later learn this was a Dravhari acceptance gesture, as culturally significant as a handshake or a signature, and said clearly for the room to hear, I accept. The noise that came after was different from the noise before. I think it was something closer to applause, but I'm still not sure. Part 2, First Contact Up Close. The paperwork of the unification pairing took 3 days. I'm telling you that because the contrast matters. You have this extraordinary moment in the choosing hall, and then you spend the next 72 hours in a series of administrative offices, signing things in triplicate, and having your biometrics recorded and sitting through orientation briefings about cross-species cohabitation protocols. Vorith sat through all of it with the same quality of focused attention I would come to recognize as her resting state. She didn't fidget. She didn't seem bored. She absorbed information the way a really good student does, not passively, not just writing things down, but actually processing visibly. On the second day of paperwork, in a waiting room between 2 administrative appointments, she said, without looking up from the data tablet she was reviewing, your species uses caffeine as a neurological stimulant. Coffee, I confirmed. Yeah. Is it effective? Extremely. It's probably our most significant cultural institution. She looked up at that. More significant than your religion structures, your governmental forms. On a day-to-day basis, coffee wins by a mile. She studied me for a moment with that recalculating quality. Then she looked back at the tablet. I'll try it, she said. That was the second surprising thing she said to me. The third came on the third day, when we were in the final orientation briefing with a conclave mediator. A Keth named Seventhamber who had handled dozens of unification pairings, and had a very practiced, very smooth way of explaining cross-species cohabitation considerations. Seventh Amber was walking through the section about conflict resolution protocols when Vorth raised her hand. Seventh Amber paused, clearly slightly surprised by the hand raise. It's a very human gesture in a conclave context. Yes, Vorth candidate. The conflict resolution protocols, Vorth said. They recommend third-party mediation for interspecies disputes that escalate beyond a certain threshold. Define the threshold. Seventh Amber explained the threshold. It involved several behavioral indicators. Vorth nodded slowly. Then she said, "What is the procedure if one member of the pairing challenges the other to a dominance assertion?" The room went very still. Seventh Amber's color patterns, Keth equivalent of expression, shifted through something I couldn't quite read. That would depend on the species norms involved. In this specific pairing, the human representative would not be expected to. The human representative, Vorth said, should be given the honest information, not the comfortable information. She looked at me. Among Dravhari, dominance assertions are a form of communication. They are not always hostile. They sometimes mean I need to know who you are when things get hard. I will not initiate one, but you should know what it means if I ever do. Seventh Amber was clearly trying to figure out how to handle this. I helped them out. What does it look like? I asked Vorth. I'll tell you when you need to know, she said. For now, just know it's not an attack. Okay, I said. Seventh Amber blinked all four of their eyes in rapid sequence. Then they moved on to the next section of the orientation. Our joint assignment for the year was on a conclave research station called the Meridian Post. It was positioned at a stable gravitational point between three systems, which made it an ideal location for long-range observation and interspecies research collaboration. It had a crew of about 400, from maybe 30 different species, ranging from scientists to security to administrative staff. Our role was cross-species liaison, meaning we were the humans' formal representatives in a joint Dravhari human presence at a conclave institution. We were there to work, to collaborate, to demonstrate that the pairing was functional and the relationship between our species was developing in a positive direction. It was, Ambassador Delane had said before I left Earth's communication range, a tremendous opportunity. She had also said, don't start any incidents. I was going to try very hard. The Meridian Post smelled like recycled air, machine oil, and something faintly floral that I later traced to a plant species kept in the station's hydroponics bay that released mild aromatic compounds as part of its growth cycle. It was an oddly homey smell once you got used to it, like a greenhouse that had been put inside a spacecraft. Vorth's assessment of the station, offered within the first hour of our arrival, was concise. Good sightlines in the common areas. 3 structural weaknesses in the outer ring, but they're compensated by redundant shielding. The crew looks competent. The security lead is Vulgari, which means protocol first, which means anyone who bypasses protocol will catch them off guard. Are you expecting to need to bypass protocol? I asked. I expect for there to always be a situation where protocol is insufficient, she said. It's practical to know where the edges are. Have you always thought like this? She considered the question seriously, which was something I was noticing. She took questions seriously, even casual ones, in a way that wasn't ponderous but was very deliberate. Since I was 12 years by your calendar, I was sent to the first stage of warrior training. 12. Is that young? For military training, on Earth vary. She processed this. The Dravhari reasoning is that earlier training allows the body and mind to develop simultaneously rather than sequentially. The body develops combat capability. The mind develops the thinking patterns that make that capability useful rather than destructive. And did it? She looked at me sideways. Ask me after a year, she said. This was becoming a pattern. I was filing it away. Our quarters were adjacent, with a shared common room between them. The conclave had made thoughtful accommodations for both of us. My room was calibrated to Earth-standard gravity and atmospheric composition. Voreth's ran about 8% higher in gravity and a few points denser in air. The common room split the difference, which was comfortable enough for both of us. On the first evening, we were sitting in the common room. I had station coffee. It was synthetic, not great, but it had caffeine, and she had a cup of the same. She picked it up, smelled it carefully, took a measured sip. Her face did something complicated. It's bitter, she said. Yeah, is that a problem? No, she said, and took another sip. The Dravhari value bitter things. There is a saying, the thing that is hard to consume is usually the thing that makes you stronger. This is bitter, therefore it is probably good for me. I stared at her. That's the most intense take on coffee I've ever heard. Is my reasoning flawed? No, actually. It's essentially correct. Caffeine is a mild toxin that the body learns to process. Then the saying holds. She took a third sip. I'll have this every day. I laughed. I didn't mean to, it just came out. It was the first time I'd actually laughed since arriving at the choosing hall, and it felt like something releasing that I hadn't known I was holding. Voreth watched me laugh. Her expression was not quite amused, but something adjacent to it, like curiosity satisfied. Humans laugh when they are happy, she said. And when things are unexpected, and when we're nervous, and sometimes when things are absurd. Many functions for one response. We're efficient that way. She set down the coffee cup. I laughed once, she said, in front of a commanding officer in training. She made me run circuits for 2 hours. That seems extreme. The Dravhari laughter instinct is connected to the same physiological state as the release of tension response in combat. A warrior who laughs mid-engagement is a warrior who has let their guard down at the wrong moment. The discipline is practical. I thought about that. Do you ever laugh in private? The question sat between us for a moment. I don't know what private means to a Dravhari, she said finally. We don't have much of a concept for it. Dravhari live in units. You are always with your unit. That sounds lonely, I said, then immediately wondered if I'd said the wrong thing. She looked at me with those amber eyes. That is the second time a human has said something about a Dravhari cultural norm that made me want to understand the perspective rather than dismiss it. What was the first time? Your historical records, she said. There is a document, a personal account from a conflict in your 20th century. A soldier writing about sitting alone in a trench. He described the loneliness as the only honest feeling he'd had in months. I read that 3 times. I knew the type of document she meant. There were millions of them. Human history produced an extraordinary volume of first-person accounts of suffering, which in context was often something dark and complicated, but which apparently, read by a Dravhari warrior from the outside, looked like something else. What did you make of it? I asked. That humans understand isolation, she said, not just as a tactical condition, as a feeling. The Dravhari do not have a word for loneliness. We have words for tactical isolation, strategic separation, temporary unit detachment, but not loneliness as an interior experience of absence. She picked up the coffee again and looked at it. That is strange to me, she said, and I find I am still thinking about it. Build tension deepened. 3 weeks into the Meridian Post assignment, we had our first problem. It started with a research team argument that I was technically not supposed to be involved in. A Vulgari scientist named Karath II, one of about a dozen Vulgari researchers on the station, had gotten into a data rights dispute with a Marinid research lead named Osthal. The dispute was over attribution on a published observation paper. It was, In the grand scheme of galactic politics, a very small thing. Except that Karath too was senior to Osthal in conclave rank, not in scientific rank, and had been using that distinction to pressure Osthal in ways that were creating a genuinely toxic dynamic in the research division. I heard about it through the station's informal communication network, which basically means the coffee room. I heard about it, I noted it, and I was deciding whether it was something that fell under our liaison mandate or whether I should refer it upward. Vorith had already decided. She came to find me in my office, a small space with a desk, a viewport that showed the slow rotation of the nearest star system, and a communications terminal I spent far too many hours on. She appeared in the doorway without knocking. I'd already noticed she didn't knock. I'd been trying to decide if it was a cultural thing or a Vorith thing. "The Volgari researcher," she said. "Karath too, yeah, I heard. It will escalate. It's a research credit dispute, those happen." "It will escalate," she said again, as if saying it twice would help me understand that she wasn't speculating. Karath too is using rank as leverage because he has lost the factual argument. When the factual argument is lost and the rank leverage fails, and it will fail, the Marinid is correct on the science, he will find another lever. The pattern is consistent. "You know Karath too." "I know that type," she said. "The form of behavior is universal, species variation is surface, the pattern is the same." I leaned back in my chair. "What do you want to do about it?" "Not what I want to do," she said. "What is the correct action within the constraints of this assignment?" "Which is different from what you want to do." "Usually." I found that fascinating in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Here was a person who was, by any external measure, physically and temperamentally equipped to simply handle things in the most direct way possible, and who was consistently, deliberately restraining herself within the framework we'd been given. "Tell me what you want to do first," I said. "Then we'll figure out what we should do." She was quiet for a moment. "I want to have a direct conversation with Karath too," she said. "Not a confrontation, a conversation, in which I make it clear that I have noticed the behavior, and that the behavior needs to stop. And if he doesn't respond to that." Her expression didn't change exactly, but something in the set of her face became more definite. "Then I escalate the conversation." "What does that look like?" "Louder," she said simply. "I thought about this. Here's the thing," I said. "In human diplomatic tradition, that kind of direct intervention, even well-intentioned, can backfire. If it looks like the Dravhari representative is using presence to intimidate." "I would not be using presence to intimidate," she said. "I would be using clarity to inform. The line between those two things is not always obvious from the outside." She considered this with that deliberate quality she brought to all information. "Then, what is your recommendation?" "Joint approach," I said. "We both go. It's a liaison function which is our mandate. We go together, we make it formal, we make it procedural. That way it's not a Dravhari making a direct challenge. It's the interspecies liaison team flagging a protocol concern." She thought about this. "The outcome is the same. But the optics are different." "Optics," she said, and there was something in the way she said the word that told me she found the concept marginally absurd. "Humans care very much about optics." "Humans invented the concept of PR," I said. "It's both our greatest talent and our most irritating habit." Something happened near the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but something. "All right," she said, "joint approach." We met with Karath too the following morning. He was in his research lab, a space full of the kind of Volgari technical equipment that looks like someone took a very clean, very precise aesthetic, and applied it to everything in the room with a slight obsessive intensity. Karath too himself was tall, as Volgari tend to be, with the diamond 4-eye pattern and the characteristic Volgari posture of someone who, was used to being the most analytically capable person in any room. He was not pleased to see us. "I was not informed of a scheduled appointment," he said. "Liaison visits don't require scheduling," I said pleasantly. "We're doing a general integration assessment, part of our mandate." He looked at Vorith. In the Vulgari 4-eye pattern, 2 eyes look at the primary subject, and 2 can independently track secondary information, a remarkably effective sensory arrangement. 2 of his eyes were on her in a way that I was coming to read as recalculation. "Dravhari representation at this station is unusual," he said. "We're the unification pairing," I said, "joint human Dravhari. It's in the public record." "I am aware." "Great." I pulled up the data tablet I'd brought with me, which had the station integration assessment form on it, a real document, correctly filled out, because if you're going to use a bureaucratic cover, you'd better have real bureaucracy behind it. Part of the assessment looks at collaborative research dynamics. We've noted that the team in your division has had some workflow challenges recently. Karath2's 4 eyes went very still. In Vulgari body language, I'd learned stillness is not neutrality. It's the equivalent of narrowing your eyes. "Research teams have workflow challenges," he said. "Sure, we're just making a note for the record." A long pause. Then Vorith, who had been standing slightly to my left and hadn't spoken yet, said, "The Marinid researcher, Osthal, her work on the thermal variance data is correct." Karath2 looked at her fully for the first time. "That is a matter of ongoing evaluation." "No," Vorith said. "It is a matter of settled fact. The data analysis has been independently reviewed by the computational systems team. The conclusion supports her methodology. The dispute is not about the science." The room temperature, in the metaphorical sense, dropped about 5 degrees. "The dispute," Karath2 said carefully, "involves complex questions of research attribution that. The dispute involves rank being used as a substitute for a factual argument." Vorith's voice was exactly the same level and tone as it had been for the previous sentence. She wasn't raising it. She wasn't visibly tense. She was simply stating, "This is a documented pattern." I have read 14 cases in conclave records where a similar dynamic produced first a hostile research environment, then a formal grievance procedure, then a review board that ended the senior party's conclave access. Karath2 was very, very still. "The pattern has a consistent outcome," Vorith said. "I find it useful, when I see a pattern with a consistent outcome, to offer the person in the early stages of the pattern the opportunity to choose a different path." Another pause. "This is," Karath2 said finally, "not standard liaison procedure." "No," Vorith agreed. "Standard liaison procedure would involve filing a report and waiting for a committee to convene. I prefer efficiency." I was watching Karath2's 4 eyes process this information. I had the quiet, almost detached awareness of watching something go very well. "I will," Karath2 said slowly, "reconsider the attribution question." "That's good," I said. "We'll note that in the assessment report. Integration response, positive." We left. In the corridor outside the research lab, Vorith was quiet for about 10 steps. Then she said, "You had the bureaucratic document ready." "Always have the paperwork," I said. "Humans learned a long time ago that actual authority and documented authority are 2 different things, and documented authority wins more often." She processed this for a few steps. "That is a more sophisticated approach than I expected." "What did you expect?" "Either confrontation or avoidance. You found a third path." "Yeah, we call it lawyering. It's a time-honored human tradition." That thing happened near the corner of her mouth again, fractionally closer to a smile this time.